Welcome to our channel. Draw the curtains, if you will, and let the lamplight fall gently upon the page. There is a house in the countryside where the silver has been polished, the roses arranged with unusual care, and a certain door left ajar that ought to have been closed. Somewhere within, a small Belgian gentleman is adjusting his mustache. He has not yet spoken. He is only watching. Settle in. The evening will not be quiet for long. Today's mystery is The Disappearance of Lady Whitmore, a Hercule Poirot mystery. Section 1. The scream came at 17 minutes past 9, and it was the sort of scream which no one in the house could later agree upon. The maid, Alice, said it had been shrill and short. The butler, Hensley, insisted it had been low and drawn, more a gasp than a cry. Mr. Godfrey Whitmore, who had been in the library with his brandy and his newspaper, claimed he had heard nothing at all, though the newspaper, when observed afterwards, was found folded to a page he had already read that morning. Hercule Poirot heard it perfectly. He was standing at the tall window of the yellow drawing-room at Marbury Court, admiring the arrangement of white roses upon the console table, when the sound reached him. He did not startle. He merely tilted his small, egg-shaped head to one side, as though the scream were a question requiring careful consideration, and observed that one of the roses had been placed at a slightly wrong angle, tilting a quarter-inch out of the pattern. Someone had touched it, and touched it hurriedly. "Curious," he murmured. "That is the second time this evening." Colonel Arthur Race, who had invited Poirot down for what was to have been a quiet weekend of shooting and reminiscence, appeared at the doorway looking troubled. "Poirot, did you—" "I heard it, mon ami. It came from upstairs, I think. From Lady Whitmore's dressing-room, to be precise." Race did not ask how he knew. He had learned, over the long years of their acquaintance, that such questions produced only smiles and philosophical remarks about the geometry of sound. They ascended the great staircase together. It was a house of considerable elegance and considerable age, built by Sir Marcus Whitmore's grandfather in the confident years of empire, and it retained the confident smell of beeswax, cedar, and old money. Portraits of Whitmore's dead and gone watched them climb, each ancestor more disapproving than the last, as though they had anticipated tonight's disturbance for generations. Upon the first landing they met the housekeeper, Mrs. Ives, who was clutching her keys as if they were a rosary. "Sir, she is not there." "Not there?" said Race. "Her ladyship's dressing-room. The door was locked from within. I have knocked. I have called. There is no answer. But—" Mrs. Ives swallowed. "The window is open, and she is gone." Poirot did not increase his pace, but neither did he slow. He walked with the careful, precise steps of a man who had learned that hurry seldom improved anything except the pulse. The dressing-room of Lady Cecily Whitmore lay at the end of the east corridor. It was a pleasant room in daylight, all pale rose and cream, with a French writing desk beside the window and a mirrored dressing table upon which 100 small feminine objects were customarily arranged with the fastidious order of a woman who could not bear disorder. The door had been forced by Hensley, whose shoulder now ached considerably. It stood open upon what appeared at first glance to be an empty room. The window was indeed open. A cool night wind stirred the muslin curtains. Below, the flagstones of the terrace lay some 20 feet down. There was no body. There was no ladder. There was no rope. There was, upon the writing desk, a half-finished letter, the pen still uncapped beside it, the ink not yet fully dry. And there was, upon the dressing table, a great disorder. Poirot stopped in the doorway and lifted one gloved hand. "If you please, do not enter. Not yet." He surveyed the room without moving. He noted, with the patience of a man cataloguing evidence for private use, that Lady Whitmore's hairbrush had been thrown to the carpet, that her jewel case stood open, its contents apparently untouched, that a small crystal scent bottle had been overturned and had left a dark stain upon the polished wood, and that the mirror, in which the arrangement of the room was doubly displayed, showed him a further curiosity. One of the enamel-backed brushes upon the dressing table sat at a peculiar angle,
tilted a quarter-inch out of the pattern. The same quarter-inch. The same wrong angle. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Someone has been hurried," he said softly, "and someone has been careful."
It is not always the same person. Colonel Race, who had been raised on plainer arithmetic, said, "She has been taken." "That is one possibility." "You suggest another?" "I suggest, mon ami, that this room contains at least 3 stories, and only one of them is true." Behind them, footsteps came briskly along the corridor. Mr. Godfrey Whitmore, Sir Marcus's younger brother, arrived flushed and out of breath, though whether from exertion or from something else, Poirot could not yet say. He was a handsome man of 40, with the loose good looks of a person who had never been required to work particularly hard for anyone's affection. "What in God's name is going on? Alice says Cecily has been—" "Please, monsieur." Poirot raised a hand. "The room. It must be observed before it is trampled." "Trampled? I hardly think." "Precisely. You do not think. You feel. And feeling in this house at this moment is exactly what will destroy the truth." Godfrey Whitmore had the grace, or the practice, to redden. He stepped back. They stood then, 3 men in a lit doorway, looking upon the small feminine chaos of an absent woman. Poirot's eyes moved from the desk to the window to the dressing table, to the small pale square upon the wallpaper where a picture had been recently taken down. He noticed the square. He said nothing about it. "Where," said Poirot at length, "is Sir Marcus?" Mrs. Ives spoke from behind them. "In London, sir. He was to have returned tomorrow. Her ladyship expected him on the 11:40. "And the household this evening?" "Miss Isabel is in the music room, sir. Mr. Godfrey you see before you. Dr. Lomax dined with us and remained for cards. Mr. Neville was in the smoking room until the disturbance. And Miss Priscilla had gone out walking upon the terrace." "Upon the terrace," Poirot repeated. "Beneath this window?" "Yes, sir." "And Miss Priscilla, she saw nothing, heard nothing? A body falling, perhaps, or a woman being lowered upon a rope?" Mrs. Ives hesitated. "She has not yet returned indoors, sir." Poirot's small dark eyes turned slowly to Colonel Race. "That," he said, "is very interesting indeed." He stepped at last into the room. He moved with such care that the pile of the carpet was scarcely disturbed. He bent over the unfinished letter upon the desk. He read it without touching it. The hand was Lady Whitmore's, familiar to him from a card she had written him only that afternoon. The ink had begun to dry unevenly, as though the writer had left off in mid-sentence. The letter read, "My dear Marcus, I cannot go on like this. I must tell you what I have seen. If you love me, come at once, for I fear." The sentence ended there. There was no signature. There was, however, in the margin, a small doodle. 3 interlocked circles, drawn with the absent precision of a woman thinking of something else while her pen moved of its own accord. Poirot studied the doodle for a long moment. 3 circles, he murmured. 3 circles interlocked. Now what, one wonders, is the geometry of that? He straightened. He looked once more at the dressing table, at the enamel-backed brush that sat at its wrong quarter-inch angle. He looked at the open window, at the muslin curtain lifting in the wind, at the terrace lying dark below. Somewhere in the house a clock struck the half-hour with excessive gentility, as though embarrassed by what had happened, and from the corridor came the sound of a woman weeping, softly, decorously, as one is taught to weep in houses of this kind. "Come," said Poirot, and his voice was almost tender. "We must now begin, mon ami, the very unpleasant business of asking who was where and who was lying,
and who has already begun to forget. He closed the door behind them with his own hand. Section 2. He closed the door behind them with his own hand, and the small metallic snick of the latch seemed to seal, for that moment, all that the room might yet reveal. Colonel Race let out a breath he had not realized he had been holding. "Poirot, we must send for the police. But of course, in due course. Yet consider, mon ami, the police. They arrive with heavy boots, they ask heavy questions, and they receive in reply the answers a household has agreed upon amongst themselves in the 20 minutes since they last were alone. 20 minutes is a very long time in a house of frightened people. Let us first see what has not yet been arranged." He turned to Mrs. Ives, who stood pressing her keys against her thin bosom as though they were the only solid thing in the world. "Madame, be so good as to gather everyone in the drawing-room. Everyone, you understand. The doctor, the young lady of the music, Mr. Neville, Mr. Godfrey. And when Miss Priscilla returns from the terrace, she also. She is not to be permitted to change her clothes, nor to wash her hands, nor to speak with anyone before she comes to me." Not wash her hands, sir." "Especially not that." Mrs. Ives departed with the pale composure of a woman who had been trained never to appear astonished, no matter what was said to her. Godfrey Whitmore had lingered upon the landing. He was leaning against the banister with an air of arranged carelessness which Poirot, in his long observation of men, had learned to distrust. A man who leaned against a banister at such a moment was a man who wished to appear at ease, and a man who wished to appear at ease had, generally, a reason for it. "Look here, Monsieur Poirot," said Godfrey. "I don't wish to be difficult, but if Cecily has thrown herself from that window, or been taken, or whatever, then surely the correct course is to do exactly," said Poirot, "what you are attempting to prevent me from doing." Godfrey's smile stiffened. "I am not aware of preventing anything." "You are aware, monsieur, that I have not yet asked you a single question, and yet you are already answering. This is one of the smaller sorrows of my profession. People are so eager to be innocent that they tell me all their secrets before I have inquired." Colonel Race made a sound that might have been a cough. "I merely meant," said Godfrey, recovering, "that Marcus should be telegraphed." "He shall be. But first, monsieur, before you descend to the drawing-room, a small courtesy. Where were you at 17 minutes past 9? "In the library, as I said." "With your newspaper?" "With my newspaper." "Which was folded, I believe, to the racing results at Doncaster. A meeting which took place, unless my English memory betrays me, upon Tuesday last." Godfrey's colour rose. I had been rereading." "Ah, that is a habit, monsieur, which you must cultivate more carefully. A man who wishes to appear to have been reading should turn the pages from time to time." Poirot inclined his head with great politeness. "Please, the drawing-room. We shall not detain you long." Godfrey descended the stairs with the stiff shoulders of a man who has been quietly informed that a rope, hitherto invisible, has been placed about his neck. Race waited until he was out of hearing. "You have made an enemy, Poirot." "I have made a witness. It is a distinction the guilty often fail to appreciate until it is too late." They walked back along the corridor. Poirot paused, however, at a portrait upon the wall, a small oil, indifferently painted, of a young woman in a pale green dress. Beside it, upon the wallpaper, was that same pale square where a picture had lately been removed. He did not remark upon it aloud, but he lifted with delicate finger and thumb the corner of the little oil and observed the wall behind it. The paper there was of the same faded tone as the rest, no brighter, no darker. "This picture has hung here a very long time," he murmured, "and its neighbour has not." "You are thinking of the square in Cecily's room?" I am thinking, mon ami, of what has been taken from a woman's dressing room in the same hour that she herself has vanished. A picture, not the jewels which lay open and undisturbed, not the letters which lay upon the desk. A picture. Race frowned. A photograph, perhaps. A photograph or a miniature or a small watercolor. Whatever it was, someone believed it worth more than sapphires. They descended. In the drawing room they found the household assembled with the awkward, arranged composure of people who did not yet know what expression it was correct to wear. Miss Isabel Whitmore, Sir Marcus's daughter by his first marriage, sat upon the piano stool with her back very straight. She was 22, dark, and possessed of that carefully groomed prettiness which comes to young women who have been told from childhood that they will one day be rich. Her eyes, however, were red. She had been crying. Poirot noted this, and noted also that she had not yet cried enough to smudge the powder along her cheekbones. A woman weeps in different ways for different reasons. Dr. Lomax, family physician of some 30 years' standing, was a stout man with a bald pink head and the eyes of a countryman who had seen more of the human interior than most. He sat with his brandy at the fireplace and did not rise when Poirot entered. The small discourtesy of a man who considered himself an equal fixture in the house. Mr. Neville Carr-Bennet, a young cousin engaged, Poirot understood, to Miss Isabel, stood at the mantel. He was tall, fair, and possessed the elegant nervousness of a young man who had been sent down from Oxford for reasons he preferred not to elaborate upon. He had lit a cigarette and was smoking it too quickly.
Godfrey Whitmore had taken up his position by the window, arranged carelessly still, and gazing at the dark garden with the studied disinterest of a man determined not to be seen looking at anyone. Priscilla Whitmore was not present. "Where," said Poirot, "is Miss Priscilla?" "Not yet returned, sir," said Hensley from the doorway. "Alice has been sent to look." "Ah, then let us begin with those who are here." He moved to the center of the room with the small, precise steps of a conductor approaching his orchestra. He did not sit. He preferred, in these first moments, to stand where he might see every face at once. "Mesdames and messieurs, Lady Whitmore is not in her dressing room. She is not in the corridor. She is not, so far as we have discovered, within the house. The window of her dressing room stands open. There is upon the terrace beneath no body. This, at least, I have caused Hensley to verify. There is, however, a letter half written upon her desk to Sir Marcus, and an object of some description has been taken from the wall. I ask each of you, therefore, one question. It is a very simple question. Where were you at 17 minutes past 9, and with whom?" Silence. Then Miss Isabel, with great composure, "I was here, at the piano. Neville was with me." Neville nodded quickly. Quite so." "You were playing?" "Chopin," said Isabel. "Which piece?" There was the smallest of hesitations. "The Nocturne in E-flat." "Ah, a charming choice. And you, Monsieur Carr-Bennet, you were turning the pages?" "Yes." "Even during the passages that Miss Isabel plays by heart, and which, as any pupil of Chopin knows, one does not require a page-turner?" Neville's cigarette trembled a fraction. I was merely listening." "Merely listening? Ah, bon. That is different." Poirot inclined his head. "And Dr. Lomax?" "I was in the smoking room until about 9:15. Then I stepped into the hall to fetch my keys. I had left it upon the console. I heard the scream and came directly." "You did not go upstairs?" "There seemed a little point. Hensley was going. Ives was going. A stampede does no one any good." "A sensible instinct in a physician." "And you, Monsieur Godfrey, the library we have established?" "Yes." "With your newspaper of last Tuesday?"
Godfrey did not answer. At that moment there came from the terrace door a slight sound, and Miss Priscilla Whitmore stepped in from the night. She was a young woman of perhaps 26, pale, thin-featured, striking in a manner not quite pretty. She was Sir Marcus's ward, the orphaned daughter of an old friend, and she lived in the house on a footing which was neither quite family nor quite guest, and which had always, Poirot suspected, cost her a great deal. Her hair had been disturbed by the wind. Her gloves were still upon her hands, and upon the pale kid of her right glove, at the base of the thumb, there was a small dark mark. It might have been dew. It might have been a stain of ink.
It might have been something else altogether. She saw Poirot look at it. She did not, for the smallest of instants, hide her hand. Then she did. "Miss Priscilla," said Poirot gently, "you have been walking upon the terrace."
"Yes."
"For how long?"
"An hour, perhaps a little more."
"Beneath the window of Lady Whitmore's dressing room?"
"At times."
"And you heard nothing?" Her grey eyes met his without flinching.
"I heard the wind, Monsieur Poirot. I heard an owl in the elm. I heard once a door slam upstairs. And I heard from the drawing-room Miss Isabel playing Chopin."
"The nocturne in E-flat?"
"No, monsieur. The waltz in C-sharp minor. She has been practicing it all week."
Poirot did not turn his head, but he permitted himself the smallest of interior smiles. In the corner of his eye, he saw the enamel-precise face of Miss Isabel Whitmore go, quite briefly, quite unmistakably, white. Section 3. The whiteness left Miss Isabel's cheek almost as soon as it had come. She recovered with the swiftness of a young woman practiced in the small deceptions of the drawing-room, and her voice, when it emerged, was pitched exactly one note above its natural key.
"Priscilla is mistaken. She always is about music."
"I am not mistaken, Isabel."
"You do not know Chopin from Schumann." "I know," said Priscilla evenly, "what I heard."
Poirot did not intervene. He had learned, over the course of many quiet afternoons, that when two women who dislike one another begin at last to speak the truth, the wisest man in the room is he who says nothing at all. He merely folded his small hands before him and permitted the silence to do its patient work. Neville Carr-Bennet cleared his throat. "It is possible, Poirot, that is to say, one plays several pieces of an evening. Perhaps Isabel began with the waltz and moved to the nocturne, and neither of us can quite recall the exact—" "An excellent theory, monsieur," said Poirot politely. "Almost too excellent. It accommodates every fact at once, which is the peculiar property of theories composed after the fact. Let us set it aside for the moment." He turned then, with a delicacy that was almost tender, to Miss Priscilla. "Mademoiselle, you have been an hour upon the terrace. It is a cold night. May one inquire, you did not think to come indoors for your shawl?"
"I had my shawl."
"Ah, and yet, when you entered just now, you carried none." Priscilla's grey eyes moved, once, to the terrace door and back.
"I left it upon the balustrade."
"Upon the balustrade. Yes, that is very possible." Poirot inclined his head. "Hensley, be so good as to step out upon the terrace and fetch Miss Priscilla's shawl. Do not touch it more than is necessary. Bring it here upon a tray." Hensley bowed and departed. In the silence that followed, Dr. Lomax swirled his brandy and said, in the tone of a man who considered himself entitled to speak plainly, "Monsieur Poirot, I do not know what you are about, but you are frightening these young women half out of their wits. Am I, docteur? I should have said, on the contrary, that one of them is not frightened enough." The doctor's pink brow furrowed. "That is a curious remark. Yes, I have a habit of them." Hensley returned with the shawl upon a silver tray, as gravely as though it had been the head of John the Baptist. It was a fine thing of cream cashmere with a woven border of pale rose, and it had been folded with the sharp-cornered precision of a hand that folded things habitually. A lady's maid's fold, Poirot noted, not a young woman's careless drape. He lifted it, examined it under the lamp, and after a moment restored it to Miss Priscilla with a small bow. "Merci, mademoiselle. You may sit down. You have been most patient." She sat, and as she sat, she drew off her gloves, first the left, then the right, and laid them upon her lap with the folded knuckles uppermost, so that the little dark stain upon the kid was hidden from view. She did it naturally, without haste. But Poirot had noted the sequence of the two hands, and the fact that she had drawn off the unmarked glove first, as one who does not wish to draw attention to the marked one. Colonel Race, from his post at the doorway, was observing Poirot with the faintly bewildered admiration of a man who had shot big game upon 3 continents and had not yet learned to shoot a drawing room. "Now, mesdames and messieurs," Poirot said, "one more small matter. The picture, the small picture that hung upon the wall of Lady Whitmore's dressing room, beside the door. Who among you can describe it?" There was a curious pause, not the pause of ignorance, the pause of 5 people simultaneously deciding what not to say. Miss Isabel spoke first, brightly. "There was no picture beside the door." "Ah, indeed. None that I recall. And you, Monsieur Godfrey?" Godfrey shrugged with elaborate unconcern. "I have not been in Cecily's dressing room these 6 months. She locks it, you know. She has always been particular."
"Miss Priscilla?" Priscilla looked up. She did not hesitate.
"There was a photograph, a framed photograph of a young man in uniform. He was standing beside a horse."
The silence that followed was of a quality altogether different. Miss Isabel drew in a small, sharp breath. Neville dropped his cigarette upon the hearth and hastily retrieved it. Dr. Lomax became, for the first time that evening, extremely still.
"You are certain, mademoiselle?" "I have seen it 100 times." "You know the young man?"
Priscilla's chin lifted, a fraction.
"I know that he was my father."
There was, at this, a small collective adjustment in the room, as though the furniture itself had shifted its weight. Poirot's eyes went very briefly to Dr. Lomax, who was studying the bottom of his brandy glass with the intensity of a man reading an oracle.
"Your father, mademoiselle. Captain Aldous Vane, I believe." "Yes." "Who died in the war?" "Who was reported killed in 1917.
"And whose photograph Lady Whitmore kept, for reasons of old friendship, upon her wall?"
"Yes."
"And which has tonight been taken down?" Priscilla's mouth trembled, the smallest of movements, almost invisible, before her composure closed over it like a shutter.
"Yes."
"Thank you, mademoiselle. That is most helpful." Poirot turned and walked, unhurriedly, to the window at which Godfrey Whitmore had been so carefully leaning. There he stopped. Upon the sill of that window, half hidden behind the velvet curtain, was a small enamel-backed hairbrush, tilted a 1/4 inch out of true. He did not touch it. He turned back to the room, and his eyes moved once, gently, over each face. Miss Isabel with her red-rimmed but powdered eyes, Neville with his shaking cigarette, Godfrey with his arranged carelessness, the doctor with his oracle, Priscilla with her hidden hand. "You will not, I think, be leaving the house tonight, any of you."
Colonel Race has been kind enough to arrange for the necessary telegrams. In the morning we shall have the local inspector, and by the afternoon, I imagine, we shall have Symmachus. Until then, I suggest you retire, each of you, to your own room, and reflect upon what you have said, and what you have not said, and what you might, upon reflection, wish to say differently. He paused. "For it is my long experience, mesdames and messieurs, that the truth is a shy creature. It does not present itself in company. It waits rather for the small, dark hours, when a person is alone with the wallpaper and the ticking of a clock, and it comes then, not because we wish it, but because we can no longer bear its absence."
He bowed. They filed out one by one. Miss Isabel first, upon Neville's arm. Godfrey next, with a stiff nod that was almost a challenge. Dr. Lomax after, pausing at the door to say in his flat countryman's voice, "Poirot, when you are ready to speak with a physician who knew that unhappy family better than most, I shall be in the East Wing." He did not wait for a reply. Priscilla went last. At the doorway she paused and turned and said quietly, "Monsieur Poirot, she was afraid tonight. Lady Whitmore. She sent for me at 7. She wished to tell me something, but she could not bring herself to it. She said only that a person we had both thought dead was not dead, and that she had been wrong to keep the secret so long." Poirot's stillness deepened. "And then?" "And then she asked me to leave her. She wished to write to Sir Marcus. She said the letter would explain everything." "You did not remain?" "She wished to be alone." "And so you went upon the terrace?" "Yes." "With your shawl?" "Yes." "Which was folded upon the balustrade by the hand of your lady's maid?" Priscilla's eyes darkened. She said nothing. "Bonne nuit, mademoiselle," said Poirot softly. When she had gone, Colonel Race exhaled and rubbed his eyes with the flat of one hand. "Poirot, this is a nasty business." "It is a very sad business, mon ami. Not all nasty things are sad, and not all sad things are nasty, but this is both." "You think the dead father?" "I think," said Poirot, "that a woman does not begin a letter to her husband with the words, 'I cannot go on like this,' unless she has already gone on with something else for a very long time. And I think that a picture is not removed from a wall by a kidnapper. A kidnapper takes a body. A kidnapper does not stop to unhook a nail." He walked slowly to the console table, where the white roses stood in their crystal vase. He reached out one small, careful finger and adjusted the one which had been tilted a quarter inch out of the pattern. He restored it gently to its proper place. "Voilà," he murmured. "One thing at least has been put right this evening."
Section 4. He restored the rose to its proper place, and then, for a long moment, he did not move at all. Colonel Race waited with the patience of a man who had learned that Poirot's stillness was often more productive than another man's activity. "You are thinking of the doodle," said Race at last. "I am thinking, mon ami, of many things, but yes, the 3 interlocked circles, they occupy a certain small chamber of my mind. 3, always 3. A woman who begins a letter to her husband and who draws, without knowing that she draws, 3 circles that touch one another. A marriage. A marriage is 2 circles, Colonel, not 3. 3 is the number of a secret." Race grunted. "You mean an affair?" "I mean an entanglement, which is not always the same thing." They stood in silence a moment longer, and then Poirot roused himself with the small, brisk movement of a man who had made up his mind. "Come, there is one more room I wish to see tonight, and one more person I wish to speak with, and after that I promise you, my dear Race, you shall have your brandy and your bed." They ascended once more, but instead of turning towards the east wing, Poirot led the way to a smaller staircase behind a green baize door, the servants' passage, which climbed narrow and unlit to the upper stories. "You are visiting the maid," said Race. "I am visiting the woman who folds Miss Priscilla's shawls." At the top of the stair, in a small, clean room with a print of Queen Alexandra upon the wall, they found Miss Priscilla's lady's maid, a thin, dark-eyed young Frenchwoman of perhaps 30, whose name was Marthe. She had not undressed. She sat upon the edge of her narrow bed with her hands folded, waiting. "Ah," said Poirot, "you expected me.
Monsieur, one hears things. One hears, mademoiselle, only what one is listening for. That is a lesson I learned long ago in Brussels. Tell me, you folded Miss Priscilla's shawl this evening? I did, monsieur, at 7, when she prepared to go out. And afterwards? Afterwards I attended her ladyship. Lady Whitmore? Yes.
Her own maid, Denise, was sent into the village on an errand. Her ladyship dislikes to dress herself. I attended her. At what hour? From 8:30 until perhaps 5 minutes to 9. You were the last person, therefore, to see her. Mart's small mouth compressed. The last that I know of, monsieur. How did she seem? She had been weeping. She had ceased to weep. She was writing at her desk. She said to me, she said, Mart, if a person believed to be dead should not be dead, and if one had known it and said nothing, would one be forgiven? I said I did not know. I am not a priest, monsieur, only a maid. She smiled and thanked me. Did she mention a name? No, monsieur. Did she speak of the picture beside the door? Mart's dark eyes flickered. She looked at it, monsieur, once, as I was leaving. She said, Mart, that picture must come down tonight. Did she say why? She said, it has done its harm. Poirot was silent. Race, from the doorway, was watching him with the tight expression of a man who was beginning to see the shape of something, but not yet its face. Mart, when you left her ladyship, whom did you pass upon the corridor? I passed Mr. Godfrey, monsieur, at the end of the east passage. He appeared to be coming from the direction of her ladyship's room, though I cannot say from what door he had emerged. He spoke to you. He said, Good night, Mart, as though he had not seen me at all. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been of great assistance. One last question. Miss Priscilla, she left her room this evening with her shawl? Yes, monsieur. And her shawl, was it, when she returned, folded as you had folded it? Mart hesitated. Monsieur, I have not yet seen it since her return. Then permit me to inform you. It was folded, upon a silver tray, exactly as you fold it. Which means, mademoiselle, that Miss Priscilla, having laid her shawl upon the balustrade of the terrace, did not fold it herself before laying it there, for a young woman does not fold her shawl before setting it down. Someone else has folded it for her in the meantime. Someone with your habit of hand. Mart's face did not change, but her fingers upon her lap tightened a fraction. You went out upon the terrace, Mart? Monsieur, after Lady Whitmore dismissed you, you did not return at once to your room. You went out upon the terrace, and you folded the shawl of your young mistress, because your young mistress was... where? The maid was silent. Then, in a voice so low it was almost a breath, she said, She was in the shrubbery, monsieur, with Captain Vane. Poirot did not move. Race, behind him, drew a slow, careful breath. Captain Vane, said Poirot gently, who died in 1917. Yes, monsieur. Who did not, in fact, die? No, monsieur. How long has Miss Priscilla known this? 3 weeks, monsieur. He came upon her one evening in the lane. She has been meeting him in the shrubbery most nights since. I have kept her secret. She is very unhappy, monsieur. She has been unhappy all her life. And her ladyship, Lady Whitmore, she knew also. She discovered it 3 days ago. She confronted Miss Priscilla. There were words. Her ladyship said that Captain Vane must be sent away, that he was a bad man, that he had never been what she had thought him. Miss Priscilla did not believe her. And tonight? Mart swallowed.
Tonight, monsieur, I do not know. I only know that when I went out to the terrace at 9 o'clock to give Miss Priscilla her handkerchief, she had forgotten it. She was alone upon the balustrade. She was weeping. Her shawl was in a heap upon the stone. I folded it. She said, "Mart, go inside. Do not speak of this." I obeyed.
And Captain Veen?
I did not see him, monsieur.
Poirot nodded slowly.
Merci, Mart. You have done more for the truth this night than you perhaps know. Say nothing of this conversation to anyone, not to Miss Priscilla, not to Denise, not to Mrs. Ives. Do you understand? Yes, monsieur.
They descended the narrow stair in silence. Only when they had regained the green baize door did Race speak.
So,
a dead man is alive. A wife has learned it and been taken. A ward has been meeting him in the shrubbery. And a brother-in-law is wandering the corridors at the hour of the disappearance.
You have summarized, mon ami, the surface of the matter with admirable economy. But surfaces, Colonel, are what surfaces have always been. A place to slip upon.
They passed once more through the drawing-room. The roses stood as Poirot had left them, aligned, orderly, decorous. But he stopped short. His eyes went at once to the console table. One of the roses had been moved. Not the one he had corrected. Another. A single white rose upon the far side of the arrangement, which stood now at that same familiar quarter-inch angle out of the pattern.
Someone had entered the room in their absence and had touched it, perhaps deliberately, perhaps in passing, perhaps because a hand had reached across the table to snatch up something from beside it. Poirot bent close. Beside the vase, upon the polished surface, there was a small mark, the merest smudge, oily, no larger than a fingernail. It might have been left by a candle. It might have been left by a bootblack's rag. It might have been left by a hand that had lately handled something greased against the corrosion of the night air. A pistol, perhaps.
Race.
Yes.
The gun room. Which of them is nearest to it?
Race thought. Godfrey's study opens off it, and the little morning room where Priscilla writes her letters.
Then we shall visit the gun room. Not tonight. Tonight, mon ami, we shall let the household believe we are asleep. But you and I, we shall not be asleep. We shall be, as the English say, upon the watch.
He extinguished the drawing-room lamp with his own small hand, and in the darkness, before he closed the door, he heard, from somewhere in the great old house above them, the very soft closing of another door, a door which, at that hour, ought not to have been opened at all. Section 5. The very soft closing of that door, a door which, at that hour, ought not to have been opened, hung in the air of the darkened drawing-room like the last note of an unfinished chord. Poirot lifted a small gloved hand for silence. Colonel Race, who had been about to speak, did not. They stood in the dark and they listened. There were, in a great house at night, 100 small, honest sounds. The settling of ancient beams, the distant tick of the long case clock upon the landing, the stir of ivy against the study window. Poirot heard them all and dismissed them all. What he listened for was the sound that should not be there, the footfall upon a stair that had been trodden with the deliberate softness of a person who did not wish to be heard. It came. It descended slowly from the direction of the east corridor toward the lower hall. Poirot moved, quicker than a man of his figure was expected to move, to the drawing-room door. He opened it by an inch, no more, and set his eye to the gap. A figure crossed the hall carrying a small dark object cradled against the breast. The lamp upon the console had been lowered but not extinguished, and by its guttering light Poirot saw enough. It was Dr. Lomax. He was in his shirt-sleeves, and the object he carried was a leather case of the size that physicians employed for the smaller instruments. The doctor did not go towards the front door. He turned instead down the short passage that led to the gun room. Poirot did not follow. He waited. He counted in his head the seconds that a man required to open a door, to set down a case, to conduct such small businesses as might be conducted in a gun room at 11:15 at night. He counted to 240.
Then the doctor emerged, without the case, and returned by the way he had come. His round pink face was, as he passed beneath the lamp, no longer countryman's placid. It was drawn tight. It was the face of a man who was calculating whether he had done enough, or too much, or exactly the wrong thing. He climbed the stair. His door in the east wing closed.
"Well," breathed Race, "there is our physician."
"There is our physician," Poirot agreed, "delivering something to a gun room in the middle of the night. It is a service one does not generally find upon the accounts of a country practitioner."
They waited another 5 minutes. Then, moving with the small, precise economy of a man who did not require light to know his way, Poirot led them across the hall. The gun room was a low, plain chamber panelled in oak. Its walls hung with the racked shotguns and rifles of 3 generations of Whitmores. It smelled of gun oil and leather and faintly of camphor. Upon the shooting bench in the centre of the room lay the leather case which the doctor had brought. Poirot lifted it. It was not locked. Within, upon a bed of blue felt, lay a small, nickel-plated revolver of the sort a lady might carry in a reticule. Beside it lay a folded square of linen, stained, and beside the linen lay a note, in Dr. Lomax's blunt physician's hand, which read, "Found in the shrubbery beneath Cecily's window at 9:30. God help us all. L." Poirot read the note twice. He lifted the revolver, broke it open with a movement that suggested a lifetime of quiet familiarity with such objects, and examined the chambers. One had been fired, recently. The smell of powder still clung to it. He replaced the weapon in its case. He closed the case. He restored it exactly to the position in which the doctor had left it. "He does not wish it to be found by the police," said Race. "Or he does.
He cannot decide. He is a man, mon ami, who has been fond of that family a very long time, and who has now been asked by his own conscience a question to which he does not know the answer. Come, there is one more small pilgrimage." He led the way out, not by the passage they had entered, but through a low door at the back of the gun room, which opened upon a flight of stone steps leading directly down to the terrace. "So," murmured Poirot as they emerged into the cold night, "a person might descend from the gun room to the terrace, and from the terrace, one presumes, to a certain shrubbery beyond, without at any point crossing the main hall of the house. It is a most convenient architecture." The terrace ran the length of the south front. Its flagstones were pale under a half-moon. The balustrade above the drop was of carved stone, and along it, precisely at the point beneath Lady Whitmore's dressing-room window, Poirot paused. He knelt. He struck a match. Upon the flagstones, at the base of the wall, he examined a long, faint scrape, not deep, but recent, running from the wall outward toward the balustrade. It was the kind of mark that might have been left by the heel of a boot dragged across stone, or by a body dragged across stone, or by the corner of a heavy object trailing a metal edge. "There has been," said Poirot softly, "movement here, and it was not the movement of a woman jumping." He extinguished the match. He walked to the balustrade and looked down into the shrubbery. The shrubbery of Marbury Court was a considerable feature, dense laurel, box and rhododendron, laid out in a Victorian labyrinth of paths. In such a place a man might stand unseen at 10 paces. In such a place, indeed, a woman might have been standing all evening. They descended by the shallow terrace steps and picked their way along the nearest path. Poirot struck another match at a point where the laurel opened into a small clearing, set about with an iron seat. Upon the seat,
Upon the arm of it was a smudge of chalk-white powder, the sort of face powder a woman used to conceal a redness of the eye, and upon the ground beneath was the imprint, quite fresh, of a boot. A gentleman's boot, size 10, with a slight worn place upon the outer edge of the right heel. "Captain Vane, one supposes," said Race. "One supposes," Poirot said. They returned to the terrace. Poirot walked slowly back along it and stopped once more beneath Lady Whitmore's window. He looked up. The window still stood open, the muslin curtain still lifted in the wind, and upon the ivy that clung to the wall beneath, an ivy which in daylight no one had thought to examine, there hung, caught by a slender thorn, a torn scrap of pale rose-coloured silk. Poirot detached it with the utmost delicacy and held it in the palm of his hand. "Pale rose," said Race. "Cecily's colour." "Cecily's colour, and also, if I remember rightly, the colour of the woven border of Miss Priscilla's shawl."
He tucked the fragment away in a small envelope from his pocket. And it was then, as they stood in the pale moonlight beneath the empty window, that a woman's voice spoke behind them, low, controlled, cold. "You are wasting your time, Monsieur Poirot." They turned. Miss Isabel Whitmore stood at the terrace door in a dark wrap, her face very white, her eyes bright with something that was not tears. "Am I, mademoiselle?" "She has not been taken. She has not been murdered. She has run away." "Indeed?" "With him. With the man Priscilla has been meeting. Cecily and Priscilla have been rivals for that creature for a fortnight. Cecily won. She has gone with him tonight and left this pantomime behind her, to distract my father, to spare herself the divorce." "That is a very interesting theory, mademoiselle." "It is not a theory. She told me so." "When?" "This afternoon, in her dressing room, at 4 o'clock. Poirot studied her small, pale face for a long moment. "Mademoiselle Isabel, tell me, this afternoon at 4 o'clock, when Lady Whitmore made this remarkable confession to you, was there upon her writing desk a half-finished letter to Sir Marcus, in which she wrote, 'I cannot go on like this'?" Miss Isabel hesitated. I did not observe her desk." "Ah, that is a pity. For if you had, you would have observed that the letter had not yet been begun. It was begun, according to the ink, at approximately 8:30 this evening, which is to say, 4.5 hours after Lady Whitmore, according to you, told you she was leaving her husband. Perhaps she began a letter to her husband, telling him she was leaving him, several hours after she had told you she was leaving him." "That is possible, mademoiselle, but it does not explain why the letter she began was not that letter at all. It was, rather, a letter which began, 'I must tell you what I have seen. If you love me, come at once, for I fear.' A letter, mademoiselle, from a wife who wished her husband to save her, not from a wife who wished to escape him." Miss Isabel's mouth worked. She said nothing. "Bonne nuit," said Poirot gently. "Try, if you can, to sleep." She turned and went back into the house without another word. Poirot watched her go. He shook his small head once, with something that was very nearly pity. "She has just told me," he said, "her third lie of the evening, and it is, I think, the last of them she will find easy." Section 6. She turned and went back into the house without another word, and Poirot watched the terrace door close behind her with the small, quiet satisfaction of a man who had learned, long ago, that the last lie a person told was often the one that carried the truth in its lining. "Well," said Race, drawing his coat about him, "she is not the murderer?" "That is a very confident statement, mon ami."
Upon what do you found it? She would not have troubled to invent so poor a fiction. Or she would have troubled precisely because it is poor. Consider, Colonel. A guilty person of intelligence knows that a clever lie invites examination. A stupid lie is passed over as the harmless embroidery of an agitated young woman. To make oneself appear foolish is, in the parlor, one of the great disguises. You think she killed Cecily? I think that Miss Isabel loved her father and disliked her stepmother, and possessed the unstable temper of a young woman who has been too much indulged. I think also that she was not at the piano at the moment of the scream. Miss Priscilla is correct. The piece being played this week was the waltz. It has been drifting down the corridor for 3 evenings. Miss Isabel invented the nocturne because she does not know what she was playing at 17 minutes past 9. Because she was not, at 17 minutes past 9, playing at all. They passed back through the gun-room. Poirot closed its outer door behind them and turned, once more, the key which had been left, most obligingly, in the lock upon the inside. In the hall, the long case clock struck 11, with the small silver reproach of a butler announcing that dinner had grown cold. And with the last stroke, a bell rang shrilly at the servants' end of the house. Hensley appeared, still in his black coat. "Sir, the telegraph office at Marbury has sent word. Sir Marcus's train from London was held at Reading, a signal failure. He will not arrive until 7 in the morning." "Merci, Hensley. Please instruct Mrs. Ives that no one is to leave the house before then. No one. Not by carriage, not by dog-cart, not on foot. If any person attempts it, they are to be delayed by any polite means at your disposal until I am summoned." "Very good, sir." "And Hensley, a small favour. When you conveyed Miss Priscilla's shawl upon the silver tray this evening, was it wet?" Hensley considered. "It was damp, sir, not soaked, as from the dew."
"Along which edge?" "The lower fringe, sir, and a patch upon one corner." "Merci, that will be all." When the butler had gone, Race said, "Damp along the lower fringe. It has been trailing upon the terrace flagstones." "Trailing, mon ami, but also the patch upon the corner. That is not dew, that is something else. Something absorbed in a small quantity from a hard surface." They went without further conversation to Poirot's own bedroom, which lay in the west wing. Race remained but a moment. He returned within the quarter hour in his slippers and dressing gown, carrying his old service revolver in his pocket like a man who was too experienced not to prepare for the worst. Poirot did not undress. He drew a small armchair to the window that looked out upon the terrace, drew from his bag a black cape of soft wool, and settled himself with an air of infinite patience. "You mean to watch all night?" said Race. "I mean to watch, my friend, until whoever in this house believes themselves safe attempts the second act of their evening." "You believe there will be a second act?" "I believe, mon ami, that whoever has done this thing has not done it alone, and I believe that 2 persons who have committed a crime together do not sleep well upon the same night, in the same house, without the temptation to meet once, in the small hours, to reassure one another. It is human. It is even, in its terrible small way, touching. And it is fatal." Race extinguished the lamp. They sat in the darkness. Below them the terrace lay pale under the drifting moon. An hour passed, then another. At 20 minutes to 2, a shadow detached itself from the shrubbery at the far end of the garden and moved, without haste, toward the terrace steps. It was a man. He was tall. He walked with the small, deliberate limp of a soldier who had been shot once, long ago, in the right thigh. Poirot did not stir. The man reached the terrace. He waited beneath Lady Whitmore's window. He did not look up. He looked rather at the terrace door. After a moment, that door opened, and a figure in a dark wrap emerged. Not Priscilla.
It was Dr. Lomax. The two men stood face to face upon the flagstones. They spoke, but at such a distance and in such low voices that no word carried to the window above. What could be observed was this. The tall man made a small emphatic gesture, palm outward, as of a man refusing something. The doctor pressed something upon him, a folded paper or an envelope. The tall man took it, unwillingly, and thrust it into his coat. Then the doctor laid a hand upon the tall man's shoulder, the gesture of a physician or of a father, and the tall man's own hand rose briefly to cover the doctor's, in the gesture of a son. They parted. The tall man walked back the way he had come, into the shadow of the shrubbery. The doctor stood a moment longer upon the terrace, his round shoulders slumped, looking not at the departing figure but at the window above him, the window from which, 5 hours before, Lady Whitmore had vanished. Then he too went in. "Well," breathed Race. "Well, well." "Yes, mon ami, well indeed." "The doctor is protecting Vane." "The doctor is doing more than protecting Vane. The doctor has been protecting Vane, I begin to think, for a very great many years." Poirot rose stiffly from his chair. He shook his cramped legs. He drew his cape more closely about him. "Come, we shall not sleep, but we shall drink coffee, mon ami, for Mrs. Ives, whose loyalty is to a house rather than to persons, has been so good as to leave a pot warming in my sitting-room. And while we drink it, I shall tell you what I now believe I know, which is not yet all, but which is enough to make what remains only a matter of the correct question, put to the correct person, at the correct hour." They took their coffee at the small table in the sitting-room. Poirot did not at first speak of the case. He spoke rather of a certain regiment, the 12th Hussars, in which he had once had, during his war work, a small, quiet interest. "There was a Captain Aldous Vane, mon ami, who was reported killed in the spring offensive of 1917. But there was, in the records of that regiment, one small irregularity. His identification disc was found upon a body in a shell hole near Arras. The body, however, had been so disfigured that it could not be positively identified. It was buried under his name because the disc was there, and because the war does not permit the leisure of doubt." "You are suggesting the disc was placed?" "I am suggesting, mon ami, that Captain Aldous Vane was a man of considerable charm and, one is sorry to record, of considerable debt. He had, at the time of his supposed death, embezzled some £60,000 from the officers' mess and from certain trusting brother officers. He had also, one gathers from confidential inquiries which I made in Paris some years ago upon another matter, contracted a marriage in Rouen with a woman who was not his wife in England, which is to say, with a woman who was not Priscilla's mother." Race stared. "Priscilla's mother?" "Priscilla's mother died, mon ami, believing herself a widow. She died also believing her husband a hero. Neither, alas, was true. Priscilla has been raised in the shadow of a hero who did not exist. It is a heavy shadow for a young woman to grow up beneath. And it explains, I think, much of her, how shall I say, the peculiar defiance of her nature." "And the doctor?" "The doctor was Aldous Vane's cousin. I made the small inquiry after dinner of Mrs. Ives, who has been in this house 40 years and knows the county genealogies as another woman knows her hymns. Lomax and Vane, first cousins upon the mother's side. Lomax was the one who received the disc from the trenches. Lomax was the one who identified the body. Lomax has been, I believe, sending certain small sums to a certain forwarding address in France for a decade, in what he doubtless persuaded himself was the settling of an old debt. And Cecily discovered it." "Cecily, mon ami, was Aldous Vane's cousin also, upon the father's side. She was, in her girlhood, in love with him. She married Sir Marcus upon the news of Aldous' death, and it was a marriage of grief and duty rather than passion. 3 weeks ago, at a small hotel in Torquay, she saw a man crossing the lobby. The man saw her. He did not speak, but she saw him, and what she saw, she could not thereafter unsee. Race let out a long, slow breath. So she summoned him here. She did not need to. He had already come. He had come, mon ami, for Priscilla, his daughter, in whose small trust there resides from her mother's family an inheritance which becomes hers absolutely upon her 27th birthday, which occurs, I need hardly add, next month. Next month. Poirot set down his cup. Outside, in the great dark garden, an owl called once, and then was silent. There is our motive, my friend. There is our shadow.
What remains is to determine which of the persons in this house lifted the hand that took Lady Whitmore from her room. For that hand, I now believe, was not the hand of Captain Vane at all. Section 7. For that hand, Poirot had said, was not the hand of Captain Vane at all, and in the silence that followed the remark, the last small coal upon the sitting-room fire collapsed inward with a soft settling sound, as if the house itself had exhaled. Race set down his cup. Then whose? Ah, mon ami, that is now the question, and it is a question which the geometry of this house will help me to answer, if you will indulge me one further indignity of the small hours. He rose, retrieved a candlestick from the mantel, and led the way once more into the darkened corridor. But this time he did not descend. He climbed instead, up the small back staircase, past the servants' floor, to a narrower flight that emerged at last upon a low door of unpainted deal. "The linen loft," said Race. "The linen loft, mon ami, from which, if I have read the elevations of this house correctly, one may reach, by means of a certain trap and a certain roof, a certain other window." The loft was cool and smelled of dry lavender. Rows of shelves held sheets and pillowcases stacked with the terrible precision of an army stores. At the far end, cut into the sloping ceiling, was a small square trap. Below it, upon the boards, a low stool had been drawn up. Poirot lifted the candle. Upon the stool, and upon the 2 boards immediately beneath the trap, there were faint prints of a woman's shoe. Small, narrow, and at the toe, a faint smudge of the same chalk-white powder that Poirot had already remarked upon the arm of the iron seat in the shrubbery. "Miss Isabel's face powder," he murmured. "It travels this evening in the most unexpected directions." "You mean she climbed up here?" "I mean, mon ami, that someone in a young woman's shoe stood upon this stool and opened this trap, and that someone had, not long before, been in the shrubbery." He mounted the stool himself. He pressed the trap. It opened without difficulty, though the hinges had been recently oiled. The smell of the oil hung about the frame, sharp and industrious. Through the trap, Poirot's small egg-shaped head emerged into the cold night. Above lay a broad leaded gutter running the length of the east wing. Along that gutter a person of modest stature might walk without great danger, if they had no fear of heights, and if they knew precisely at which chimney to stop. Poirot descended. He closed the trap. He blew out his candle. "We have found our route, my friend. There is another window of Lady Whitmore's dressing room, the small oriel above the wardrobe. It is scarcely larger than the trap, but a slight woman or a slight man might pass through it, and might have done so this evening, unseen by any observer upon the terrace below. Then Cecily was not taken out through the great window at all." "The great window, mon ami, was opened for effect. It was theatre. It was intended to persuade us, and to persuade the police who should follow, that a body had been lowered, or that a woman had jumped, or that some considerable violence had been done upon the terrace.
It was intended to draw our attention downward, while the true business of the evening proceeded, quite silently, upward. Then Cecily. Cecily, I fear, did not leave this house by any window at all. They descended in silence. Poirot's small face in the candlelight was very grave. At the door of his own room he paused. Mon ami, I must ask you one further service. In the hour before dawn, Sir Marcus will arrive from London. For the signal upon the Reading line, I now suspect, will prove to have failed a great deal less than we have been told. Meet him at the station. Do not permit him to enter this house until I am with him. There is a small thing he must know, before he crosses his own threshold, that no one else must tell him. Very well. And Race, take your revolver. Race looked at him a long moment. You expect violence? I expect, my friend, that whoever removed a picture from a wall this evening did so because that picture, if seen by Sir Marcus, would explain everything. It has not been destroyed. It has been hidden, and the person who has hidden it will, before this day is out, attempt to retrieve it. I do not wish you to be between that person and their errand unarmed. Race went. The house grew quiet again. Poirot did not sleep. He sat before his sitting-room fire with a small notebook open upon his knee, and in it he wrote, in his small, careful French hand, 3 columns. In the first, he wrote the names of the persons who had been in the house at 17 minutes past 9. In the second, he wrote what each had claimed to be doing. In the third, he wrote what each, on the evidence collected, had actually been doing. Miss Isabel Whitmore claimed at the piano. Actual, not at the piano.
Neville Carr Bennet claimed turning her pages. Actual, also not at the piano. Godfrey Whitmore claimed in the library. Actual, in the east corridor. Dr. Lomax claimed fetching his case. Actual, fetching his case, and thereafter fetching something else. Miss Priscilla Whitmore claimed upon the terrace. Actual, in the shrubbery, with a dead man. Captain Aldous Vane claimed dead. Actual, living and in the shrubbery. Mart claimed in her room. Actual, upon the terrace folding a shawl. He studied the columns a long time, and then at the bottom of the page he wrote a single further name. Mrs. Ives. Beneath it he wrote no claim and no actual. He drew instead a small question mark, and after the question mark, in a hand smaller still, the 3 interlocked circles. Then he closed the book. At 6 o'clock the sky beyond his window began to pale. At 6:30 he heard, from the corridor below, the small brisk footsteps of the housekeeper going about her early duties. Poirot rose. He met her upon the landing where she was directing a housemaid at the polishing of the banister. Her keys hung at her waist. Her face in the grey light was composed, capable, worn by service. She had been in this house 40 years. She had watched the first Lady Whitmore die in the west bedroom. She had watched Miss Isabel grow from a stubborn child into a young woman of expectations. She had watched Sir Marcus bring home his second bride and observe, with the impassive dignity of her class, that the new Lady Whitmore was not, perhaps, quite what the house had been accustomed to. Mrs. Ives, a small word, if you please. She curtsied slightly and dismissed the maid with a nod. Mrs. Ives, you have keys to every room in this house. I have, sir. Including the small linen loft above the east wing. Including that, sir. When was that loft last opened? Before yesterday? She considered. Michaelmas, sir, for the airing of the winter blankets. Not since. Not to my knowledge, sir. And yet the trap in its ceiling has been oiled within the fortnight. Mrs. Ives did not blink. I could not say, sir.
You could not say, but you know, do you not, that in the small hours of last night a person passed through that trap, walked along the leaded gutter, and entered the small oriel above her ladyship's wardrobe?
Sir, I cannot.
Mrs. Ives, you are a woman who has loved this house better than she has loved any of the persons in it, and that, if I may permit myself an observation, is one of the great English tragedies. But you have loved one member of this family more than the house. I ask you, for the sake of that person, whom I believe you would not willingly see hanged, tell me, before the police arrive, who oiled that trap? The housekeeper's mouth tightened. Her eyes did not fall.
Miss Isabel oiled it, sir, a fortnight ago. She told me she wished to inspect the gutter, that a slate had fallen in the storm. I gave her the key.
And the key, she returned it?
She did, sir, that same evening.
And she did not since request it again?
No, sir, she did not need to. I keep no lock upon my own keys, sir. Any member of the family may take them from the board, and often do.
Merci, Mrs. Ives. You have been of great service to a person who does not, I think, deserve it. Her chin lifted.
I have been of service to this house, sir, that is all.
She curtsied once more and descended. Poirot stood a moment upon the landing. Below him, through the tall window at the turn of the stair, he saw the first pale gold of the sun striking the terrace, and upon the console table in the hall below, the arrangement of white roses stood exactly as he had left it, except that a rose upon its far side sat once again at a quarter-inch out of true. He went down. He did not, this time, correct it. "Very well," he murmured. "You wish us all to see that you have been in the room. Bien. We shall see it. But you shall not, this time, know when it is that we have seen." He passed on into the morning. Section 8. He passed on into the morning, and the morning at Marbury Court obliged him with the small deceits of English country life. The rooks called from the elms. The gardener whistled at his roses. Mrs. Ives set the breakfast room in order with the impassive efficiency of a woman who had risen an hour earlier than usual because the world had risen with her. And upon the drive, at 7:15, the wheels of a hired fly announced the return of Sir Marcus Whitmore. Poirot was in the vestibule when they entered. Colonel Race came first, and behind him a tall man in his 60s, silver-haired, straight-backed, with the tired good manners of the old Foreign Office. Sir Marcus had been told, upon the road, exactly as much as Poirot had judged wise, that his wife was missing, that no body had been found, that the household was accounted for, and that Poirot was in the house.
He had received the news, according to Race, with the discipline of a man who had learned in embassies how to appear composed while the floor sank beneath him. "Monsieur Poirot."
"Sir Marcus, my deep condolences upon what has passed, but permit me to say, I do not yet believe your wife is dead."
The tall man's face did not change. Only his hand upon the head of his walking stick tightened.
"You have groans?"
"I have, Sir Marcus. The geometry of a house, the folding of a shawl, and the arithmetic of a scream that reached different ears at different times. From these small things I have constructed, if not a certainty, then at least a working hope. I shall ask you to trust me a little longer."
"I have trusted you a great deal already, monsieur, upon Reese's word. You may draw upon that account."
They went into the small morning room. Poirot closed the door.
"Sir Marcus, I must ask you a question which will pain you. It has, alas, a bearing upon the matter."
"Ask."
"When you married Lady Whitmore, you knew of her affection, in her girlhood, for a certain Captain Aldous Vane."
Sir Marcus was silent a long moment. Then he said quietly,
"I knew."
"You knew also that Vane was believed to have died in 1917.
"I knew."
You did not perhaps know, for it is a thing very few know, and Dr. Lomax has been at pains to keep it so, that Vane did not die, that he lives, that he has been these 3 weeks in the neighbourhood." Sir Marcus set both hands upon his stick and rested his chin upon them. He closed his eyes. He was silent so long that Poirot feared for a moment he had gone into that dark, still place where old grief and new grief meet. Then he opened his eyes. "I did not know," he said, "that he lived, but I have suspected these 3 days that something upon that subject was pressing upon my wife. She wrote me on Tuesday. She said only, 'Marcus, an old sorrow has returned. Come home.' I answered that I would come as soon as my business permitted. It permitted a day too late. Sir Marcus, in the small oriel window of your wife's dressing room above the wardrobe, is there a communicating passage?" The tall man's brows drew together. "There was once. A dressing closet opening to the small back stair. It was closed off in my father's time when the room was made over. There should be behind the wardrobe a papered door, a very narrow door, no wider than a serving tray. The wardrobe was set against it, and I have not seen it in 30 years. "Ah," said Poirot softly, "that is what I hoped to hear." He rose. "Sir Marcus, I ask you to remain in this room for 1/2 hour. Do not receive callers. Do not go to your wife's rooms. Do not go to any window through which the terrace may be seen. Colonel Race will remain with you. I shall return shortly, and then, with your permission, we shall gather the household, for I intend, if fortune is kind, that this business shall be finished before your luncheon."
Sir Marcus nodded once, wearily. Race followed Poirot to the door.
"You mean to open the wardrobe?" "I mean to open, mon ami, several things at once." He went first back to Lady Whitmore's dressing room, of which Hensley had preserved the key. The room lay as they had left it in the night, the window still open, the letter still upon the desk, the small crystal scent bottle still overturned upon the polished wood, the dark stain now dry and dull. Poirot did not glance at these. He crossed at once to the great mahogany wardrobe against the east wall. It was a heavy piece, upon casters, but the casters had been oiled recently, and by the same industrious hand that had oiled the linen loft trap. He set his small shoulder to the corner of it. The wardrobe moved with astonishing ease. Behind it, papered in the same pale rose as the rest of the room, was a narrow door. It had been so carefully repapered that its outline was invisible at 3 paces. At 1 pace, however, one saw the small vertical line of the join, and at the height of a woman's hand, a small round depression where the paper had been pressed inward against what lay beneath. A knob or a catch. Poirot pressed the depression. The door opened inward without a sound. Beyond it lay a narrow closet, perhaps 4 feet by 6, that had once served as a dressing recess. The air within was close and smelt of camphor, and of something else, the warm, faintly sweet exhalation of a person recently breathing there. Upon the floor of the closet, upon a folded rug and a heap of pillows plainly taken from the dressing-room couch, lay Lady Cecily Whitmore. She was not dead. She lay upon her side, her hands bound before her with a strip of pale rose silk torn from her own peignoir, her mouth stopped with a folded silk handkerchief, her eyes wide and dark and, at the sight of Poirot, brimming with a relief so absolute that it went at once past speech and into weeping. Poirot knelt. He drew forth the handkerchief with the utmost gentleness.
He cut the silk from her wrists with the small penknife he carried always about his person. "Madame, it is over. You are safe. Do not speak yet. Breathe." She wept without sound. She was a woman of perhaps 42, still handsome in the fine-boned way of women who had once been beautiful. There was a bruise darkening upon her temple,
and the smear of blood dried at the corner of her mouth, but she was, so far as he could see, otherwise unhurt. "Madame, a nod will suffice. Was it a man or a woman who did this to you?" Her mouth moved. She whispered, so faintly he had to bend his head. "Both." "Both, madame?" "He struck me. She boned me. He would not have hurt me. She would not let him go without doing so." "You know their names?" Her eyes closed. 2 tears ran, one after another, from beneath the lashes. "Yes." "You may tell me presently. First, I shall carry you to your bed. Sir Marcus is downstairs. He shall be with you within the minute." "Marcus," she whispered, and then, "The picture, monsieur. The picture beside the door. It was hidden. It was hidden with—" "It was hidden, madame, in a place that a person in a hurry would think of last, because it is a place in which such an object should never be. Do not trouble yourself. I know where it is." He lifted her. She was slight, and he was stronger than his figure suggested, and bore her to the bed. He rang. Marthe came, white-faced. Denise, Lady Whitmore's own maid, returned at that moment from her errand of the previous evening, an errand into which Poirot did not, for the present, propose to inquire. Between them, the 2 women made Lady Whitmore comfortable. Poirot dispatched Hensley for Dr. Lomax, whom, at this juncture, he judged useful, and himself descended to the morning room. "Sir Marcus, your wife is upstairs. She is alive. She is bruised, but not, I think, in any serious danger. Marthe attends her. Go to her. Speak little. Ask no questions. She has been used badly and by persons whom she once trusted, and she will require of you only that you be present and silent and kind." Sir Marcus rose. His hand upon Poirot's shoulder gripped once, hard, and then released. He said nothing at all. He went. Race remained.
Poirot. Then it was 2 persons, mon ami, as I had begun to suspect. It is now a matter only of proving the second. The first is not, I think, in doubt. Vane. Vane struck her. Vane, we shall find, has already fled. For a man who has been dead 30 years knows the trick of vanishing when a house wakes. But Vane did not enter that room by the great window, nor by the small oriel. Vane never entered that room at all. He waited in the shrubbery. It was the second person who dragged Lady Whitmore, unconscious, through the little papered door into the closet, and bound her there, and returned to the room, and threw open the great window, and disordered the dressing table, and tilted a hairbrush upon the sill, and hid a photograph behind the one place in this house where no man in a hurry would look. Race said, "Where?" "Where?" said Poirot. "The roses stand." Section 9. "Where the roses stand," Poirot repeated, and for a moment Colonel Race did not follow him, for Poirot had already turned and was walking, with that precise, unhurried step of his, out of the morning room and into the hall. He went to the console table. He lifted, with the greatest delicacy, the crystal vase of white roses from its silver tray. Beneath the tray, pressed flat between the polished silver and the polished mahogany, lay a small photograph in a plain black frame, face downward. He drew it out. He turned it over. It was a photograph of a young officer of the 12th Hussars, standing beside a bay horse in the yard of a barracks. He wore his cap at the slight angle affected by young men who had not yet been shot at. His face was thin, sharp-boned, and possessed the reckless charm that afterwards leads its owners into every sort of mischief. Along the lower margin in faded ink was written, "Aldous, for Cecily, May 1916. Poirot turned the photograph over. Upon the back, in a hand quite different, and in ink that had scarcely dried, was written a single line,
He is my father. She would have taken him from me. P. Race read it over Poirot's shoulder. He drew in a slow breath. Priscilla. Priscilla. Then she is the second person. She is the person, said Poirot slowly, whom we are meant to believe is the second person. It is signed. It is initialed. It is written upon the back of the very piece of evidence which the murderer has troubled to hide. It is, in short, a confession which no guilty person, having successfully concealed her crime, would ever have written. He replaced the photograph in his pocket. He restored the vase to the silver tray, and he corrected, with the small pressure of one gloved finger, the rose which had been tilted, once again, a quarter-inch out of the pattern.
Come, mon ami, there is one further person I must speak with alone before the household is gathered, and we have not a great deal of time. He went, however, not upstairs, but to the small oak-panelled room at the end of the west corridor, in which Miss Isabel Whitmore had been in the habit, since her childhood, of sitting when she wished to be undisturbed. He knocked once. He did not wait for a reply. He entered. She was at the writing desk. She had a letter half written before her. When she saw him, her hand went quickly over the paper. Mademoiselle, I regret the intrusion.
You have not knocked long enough to regret anything.
That is true. Please do not conceal the letter. I have not come to read it. I have come to give you an opportunity. She looked up. Her small, pretty face was drawn tight. Her eyes, this morning, held no powder at all. She had not slept.
An opportunity, monsieur?
To tell me, before I am compelled to tell everyone else, what happened in the dressing room of Lady Whitmore last night at 9:17. She was silent. Mademoiselle, your stepmother is alive. She is in her bed. She has spoken. Isabel's mouth opened. For a fraction of a second, her whole face broke open, with what Poirot could not quite decide. Relief, perhaps, or fear, or something more complicated than either. She has told me that two persons were present in her room, a man who struck her, a woman who bound her. She does not yet know that I have found her. She believes still that we have not yet come, but she has spoken.
She has told you?
She has not yet told me the names. I have not yet asked. She will, however, be asked within the hour, and she will answer. I offer you, mademoiselle, the small dignity of preceding her. Isabel's fingers upon the desk trembled.
Monsieur Poirot, I did not intend.
One rarely does, mademoiselle. Intention is the smallest part of any evil. Please, begin. She was silent a long moment. Then, in a voice quite unlike her drawing-room voice, a voice thinner, younger, more truthful, she began.
I have known about Captain Vane for a fortnight. I discovered it by accident.
I was in the shrubbery with Neville, and we heard Priscilla weeping upon a bench, and a man's voice comforting her. Neville drew me away, but I went back the next night and I listened. I heard him tell her that she was his daughter. I heard her call him father. You went to Lady Whitmore with this? No, I went to Uncle Godfrey. Ah. Uncle Godfrey has always been kind to me. He said I must not speak. He said the man was an impostor, a swindler, a fortune hunter after Priscilla's trust. He said Priscilla was infatuated. He said the matter must be handled quietly, without a scandal, without upsetting father, without ruining Priscilla's name. He said he would deal with it. And did he? He did nothing. For a week he did nothing, and I began to think that perhaps he was, that perhaps Uncle Godfrey and this man were in it together, that Uncle Godfrey wished the fortune to fall not to Priscilla but to himself, through some arrangement, some sale of influence, some threat. And so you went to Lady Whitmore?
Yesterday afternoon, at 4 o'clock. I told her everything I had seen and heard. She went white, monsieur. She sat down. She said, "Aldous, alive, dear God." She said she must think. She said she would write to father at once.
You left her at 4?
I left her at 4:30. She was already at her desk.
And in the evening?
Isabel closed her eyes. In the evening, at 9 o'clock, I climbed to the linen loft. I had oiled the trap myself a fortnight ago when I was thinking of, I hardly know what. I climbed along the leaded gutter. I dropped into her dressing room by the little oriel above the wardrobe. I meant only, monsieur, I swear to you, I meant only to speak to her. I meant only to beg her not to write to father, not to make it public, not to ruin Priscilla, whom I do not love, but for whom, being a young woman as I am, I could not help feeling a little.
You entered her room?
I entered. She was not alone.
Who was with her?
Uncle Godfrey and Captain Vane. Poirot's small dark eyes did not move. Godfrey had brought Captain Vane in through the little oriel window. He had known of the passage. It was he who had oiled the wardrobe casters, not I. I had oiled only the trap. Godfrey had told Vane that Cecily was to be persuaded, to be silenced, to be given money, to be sent away. Vane was to speak with her. But Cecily, when she saw him, she did not fear him. She was angry. She said she would tell my father everything, and the police, and Priscilla, and that she would not be silent, and that no money would silence her. She said Vane was a coward and a liar, and had killed her cousin in the trenches by putting his disc on another man's body. And Vane struck her, hard.
She fell. She struck her head upon the corner of the dressing table. "And you?" I screamed. There was a long silence. "That was the scream we all heard. That was my scream, monsieur. Uncle Godfrey seized me. He said if I spoke, if I breathed a word, he would swear he had come upon me standing over Cecily with the poker, and that he had 100 small proofs to hang me with. He said I had oiled the trap. He said I had been seen upon the roof. He said I was known to have quarrelled with her. He said I had drawn my father's suspicion upon Priscilla by telling Cecily of Captain Vane, and that Priscilla would testify against me. He said I would swing." "And so you helped him?" Isabel's voice cracked. "I helped him. I bound her hands with her own peignoir, while Uncle Godfrey opened the great window and disordered the room. Vane went out again by the oriel, along the roof, down through the loft. Godfrey and I dragged her. She was breathing, monsieur, she was breathing, behind the wardrobe into the little closet. And then Godfrey pushed the wardrobe back, and he took the photograph from the wall, and he wrote something upon the back of it. I did not see what, and he pressed it into my hand. He said, 'Hide it. Hide it where they will look last. And if you are caught with it, remember that it is your handwriting they will find, not mine.' And you hid it beneath the tree of the roses, where no man in a hurry would think to look. And the writing upon the back was not mine. But it is in a hand not unlike mine, monsieur, for I copied his samples for a school prize when I was 15, and it has amused him ever since to imitate mine, as I once imitated his. He has been very clever, Uncle Godfrey. He has always been very clever." Poirot did not speak for a long moment. Then he said very gently, "Mademoiselle, you have told me at last the truth. It will not save you altogether, but it may, I think, save your neck. Come." She rose, trembling, and he took her arm. Section 10. She rose, trembling, and he took her arm, and he did not release it until they had reached the head of the staircase, where he paused and said,
in a voice softer than she had yet heard from him. "Mademoiselle, go to your room. Martha will attend you there. Do not attempt to leave the house. Do not attempt to communicate with your uncle. You have, in the last quarter hour, told me the truth, and truth, though it does not undo what has been done, is nevertheless the beginning of every possible mercy." She nodded, mute, and went. He watched her along the corridor until her door closed. Then he turned upon the landing and stood a moment looking down into the hall, where Colonel Race waited beside the console table with the roses. "You have her," Race said. "I have her testimony. I have not yet her uncle. Come, there is one further errand of the morning."
They went together to Dr. Lomax's room in the east wing. Poirot knocked. There was no answer. He tried the handle. The door was unlocked. Within, upon the bed, the doctor sat quite still, in his shirt-sleeves still, with his round pink hands folded upon his knees, and a small brown bottle upon the table beside him. The bottle was empty. His breathing was slow and even and remote. "Sacré," Poirot murmured. He crossed the room in 3 swift strides. He seized the bottle. He read the label. He set his fingers to the doctor's pulse. "Race. The stomach pump from his own bag, quickly. He has taken laudanum, but not, I think, enough. He wished to be found. He wished it very much." They worked over the doctor for the better part of the hour. When at last his round pink eyes opened and found Poirot's small dark ones bent above them, he attempted a smile. "You should have let me, monsieur. I should have permitted Docteur, one more coward to escape his obligation to the truth. No, it is not my habit. He is my cousin. He was my cousin's son. I could not testify against him." "Then do not testify against him. Testify instead for the woman upstairs, and for the young woman in the shrubbery, and for the boy you knew in 1916, before he became what he became. That, Docteur, is a testimony you may still give." Lomax closed his eyes. A single, slow tear escaped from beneath the wrinkled lid. "He was such a splendid lad, Poirot. In the beginning, before the money, before the debts, before the Rouen woman. He was very splendid. They often are, Docteur, in the beginning. It is why the world persists in loving them." He left the doctor to Denise's care. He descended once more. Upon the landing he met Sir Marcus, who had emerged from his wife's room with the shaken quiet of a man who had been permitted, at the last hour, to be spared the worst. "She sleeps. Martha is with her." "Bien. Sir Marcus, one further trial. I must ask you to be present in your drawing-room in 1/2 hour, together with all the members of this household. Your brother also." "Especially your brother." Sir Marcus's silver head lifted. His eyes, for the first time that morning, kindled. "Godfrey, Godfrey, I ask that you receive him when he enters that room as though nothing were amiss. I ask that you say nothing to him beforehand. I ask this, Sir Marcus, because I intend that he shall speak, and he shall not speak if he suspects that the small, elegant machine of his conspiracy has broken. He must believe, until I choose otherwise, that his construction stands." "He is my brother." "He is, Sir Marcus, the man who struck your wife's head against the corner of her own dressing-table, and who then persuaded a young woman, his own niece, to bind her wrists and hide her behind the wardrobe. He is your brother. He has also chosen, of his own election, to cease to be so. I ask only that you permit the law, and permit me, to complete for him what he has begun for himself." Sir Marcus was silent a long moment. Then he inclined his head once. "I shall be in the drawing-room." Poirot bowed. He turned to Colonel Race.
Rhys, send now for the local inspector. Have him wait in the gun-room, out of sight with 2 constables. He is not to enter the drawing-room until I ring, and Rhys, the shrubbery. 2 of the gardeners quietly to the shrubbery. I do not expect Captain Vane still to be there, but the possibility that he is, or that he shall return to it, must not be neglected. Very good. They parted. Poirot went alone into the yellow drawing-room. He stood a moment before the console table with the white roses. The rose upon the far side sat once again at that small 1/4 inch out of true. He looked at it. He did not correct it. You have been busy all night, Monsieur Godfrey, he murmured to the empty air, restoring your small signature to my arrangement. It has been very obliging of you. It has told me over these 10 hours everything I required to know about the particular quality of your vanity. A man who cannot resist adjusting a ruse is a man who cannot resist adjusting a story. And a story, monsieur, once adjusted by too many hands, is no longer a story at all. It is a confession.
He drew from his breast pocket the photograph of Captain Aldous Vane. He laid it, face upward, upon the console table beside the vase. He sat down in the chair by the fireplace to wait. The house, at that hour, was full of the small, quiet sounds of a household resuming, with immense relief and immense confusion, the routines of an ordinary morning. Coffee was being brought. Curtains were being drawn. Hensley upon the landing was giving instructions to a footman in the low, even voice of a man who wished no one below stairs to guess that anything above stairs was other than perfectly usual. At 9:30, precisely 12 hours, Poirot could not help remarking to himself, after the scream, the members of the household began to file into the drawing-room. Sir Marcus first, grave, composed, silver. Miss Priscilla after him, pale, with dark rings beneath her grey eyes, but walking with that peculiar defiant straightness of hers. Miss Isabel next upon Martha's arm, so white that she seemed almost to walk without touching the ground. Neville Carr-Bennet, less well-shaved than yesterday, his cigarette case fumbled between his hands. Dr. Lomax, wrapped in a dressing gown, moving very slowly but moving. Mrs. Ives at the door, ready to withdraw when dismissed. And last, Mr. Godfrey Whitmore. He came in with the loose, easy step of a man who had slept the sleep of the innocent. He wore a fresh collar. He had shaved. He smelled faintly of his brother's cologne, which he had at some point in the small hours borrowed. He glanced about the room with an air of mild inquiry, as though he had been summoned to consult upon the seating for a dinner party. His eyes went at once to the console table. They stopped upon the photograph laid face upward beside the roses. For the smallest fraction of a second, no longer than the fraction it required his heart to skip a beat and resume, the arranged carelessness of his face broke. There was in its place an expression of such naked calculation that Poirot, watching from the fireside chair, permitted himself at last a small, precise interior smile. Then Godfrey Whitmore recovered. He turned. He greeted his brother. "Marcus, my dear fellow, what a business! What a very great deal too much for one house in one night!" "Sit down, Godfrey," said Sir Marcus quietly. Godfrey sat. Poirot rose. Poirot rose, and the small, courteous movement of his rising drew, without his having to speak, every eye in the drawing-room to himself. He did not go at once to the centre of the room. He went first to the console table, and he lifted the vase of white roses aside with both gloved hands, and set it upon the mantelpiece, so that the photograph of Captain Aldous Vane lay now upon the polished mahogany quite alone, and quite unmistakable in the pale morning light. Mesdames et messieurs, last night at 9:17, a scream was heard in this house, and a woman was believed to have vanished from her own dressing-room. This morning, at 9:15, that woman lay upstairs in her own bed, alive, and had told me, in the small compass of a whispered sentence,
that she had been struck by one hand and boned by another. I have, therefore, if I may adopt the phrase of Colonel Race, been shooting these 12 hours in a considerable variety of coverts. Permit me now to draw the birds together." He crossed to the fireplace. He did not raise his voice. He spoke throughout with the small, even courtesy of a man reading aloud from a book he had already read many times. "There is in this business a shape which, once one has seen it, one cannot cease to see. It is the shape of 3 interlocked circles. Lady Whitmore drew it, without knowing that she drew it, upon her blotter last evening as she began the letter to her husband. It is the shape of 3 persons, joined at 3 edges, and each concealing something from the other 2. Captain Aldous Vane, Miss Priscilla Whitmore, and Monsieur Godfrey Whitmore. These 3, and no others, are the true actors of last night's small tragedy, although a 4th, alas, was drawn into it, and a 5th stood too long silent." He turned to Priscilla. "Mademoiselle, Captain Vane is your father. This you learned 3 weeks ago. He came to you in the lane. He told you the story of his supposed death, and of the disc placed upon another man's body, and of the debts, and of the Rouen woman. He told you, doubtless, that he had wronged your mother and could never make it good. He told you that he wished only, at the end of his life, to know his daughter. You believed him. You loved him, as unloved daughters love the fathers who at last remember them, with a fierce and blind gratitude. You have been meeting him in the shrubbery every evening for 3 weeks. You have told him of the trust which becomes yours next month. You have promised him, I think, a portion of it, out of that same gratitude. This was your first rung." Priscilla did not deny it. Her grey eyes held his without flinching. A single tear moved slowly down her cheek, and she did not put up her hand to wipe it away. Poirot turned to Godfrey.
"Monsieur, you had known Captain Vane in France in the year of his disappearance. You had known also, I strongly suspect, of the arrangement by which he became officially dead. You were even, perhaps, its author. He had owed you money in 1917, and you had discharged the debt in a currency he could not repay in coin, his identity. You have been paying him a small allowance through Dr. Lomax's forwarding address these 10 years, in exchange for his continued absence from England. 3 weeks ago that arrangement ended, without your consent, because Captain Vane discovered that his daughter possessed an inheritance which promised him, if he could establish influence over her, a sum considerably greater than yours. He returned. He came, in effect, to blackmail his own daughter into loving him. This was the second rung." Godfrey opened his mouth. Poirot lifted one small hand. "Not yet, monsieur. Presently." Miss Isabel, from an accidental discovery in the shrubbery, brought her suspicions to you rather than to her father. This was, one supposes, natural. She has been fond of you all her life, and her uncle has cultivated that fondness with the small assiduity of a man who has always foreseen a use for it. You told her the man was an impostor. You promised to deal with the matter. In fact, monsieur, you did nothing at all. Nothing, that is, but wait to see whether Captain Vane's approach to his daughter would succeed or fail. If it succeeded, the fortune would come, ultimately, into the small orbit of your own influence. For Vane would depend upon you, as he had depended upon you these 10 years, and his daughter would depend upon Vane. If it failed, you could still at some later moment betray him for a price. Either way, monsieur, you were disposed to be patient. This was the third rung. Sir Marcus had not moved. He was looking at his brother with the still, terrible attention of a man watching the drawing back of a curtain he had preferred all his life not to draw. Then, yesterday afternoon, Miss Isabel, troubled by your inactivity, went to Lady Whitmore. She told her stepmother what she had seen and heard in the shrubbery. Lady Whitmore,
upon hearing the name Aldous Vane, went white. For she had loved him once in her girlhood. She had believed him dead. She had indeed married Sir Marcus in the shadow of that belief. She recognized in a flash the danger to Priscilla, to the marriage, and to the honor of two families. She resolved at once to write to her husband and to summon him home. This was the fourth rung. You, Monsieur Godfrey, learned of this how, I cannot yet say with certainty, but I suspect through Miss Isabel, who confided in you a second time as she had confided in you a first. You realized then that Lady Whitmore, once she had spoken to Sir Marcus, would ruin everything. Vane's approach to his daughter, your 10 years' patient management, your own respectable position. Cecily must not speak. Cecily must be persuaded or silenced before Sir Marcus's train arrived from London the following morning. You conceived, therefore, a plan which required Captain Vane to enter her room. You had known, from your boyhood in this house, of the small papered door behind the wardrobe, and of the closet, and of the disused oriel above it, and of the leaded gutter, and of the linen loft. You oiled the wardrobe's casters yourself. Miss Isabel, quite separately and for reasons of her own restless mind, had oiled the trap in the loft a fortnight ago. This coincidence you turned to your advantage, for it permitted you, at need, to point suspicion at your niece. This was the fifth rung. At 9 o'clock last night, Captain Vane entered Lady Whitmore's dressing room through the little oriel, having climbed the ivy to the leaded gutter and dropped through the trap. You met him within by means of the papered door. Lady Whitmore was writing at her desk. She turned. She saw Aldous. She was not, monsieur, afraid. She was angry. She said what a woman in such a moment says, that she would tell everything, that no threat and no bribe would purchase her silence, that Vane had been a coward in 1917 and remained a coward now. Vane, whose vanity had never learned to endure the truth about itself, struck her. She fell. Her head struck the corner of her dressing table. At that instant, and this, monsieur, is the piece of the machine which you did not foresee, Miss Isabel, having reached her stepmother's room by the same route as Vane, dropped through the oriel behind you both. She saw. She screamed. That, mesdames and messieurs, was the scream which we all heard, and which no two of us heard alike. It was heard clearly by those upon the terrace and in the yellow drawing-room, because it had come from an open window. It was heard faintly, or claimed not to have been heard at all, by Monsieur Godfrey in the library, because Monsieur Godfrey was not, in fact, in the library. He was in that room. And Miss Isabel was not at her piano, and Monsieur Neville was not turning her pages, but was covering dutifully for his fiancée's absence, an absence he had, I believe, half suspected without quite daring to ask. You, Monsieur Godfrey, seized upon your niece's presence as a gift. You threatened her with hanging.
You compelled her to bind Lady Whitmore's wrists with a strip of her own peignoir. You yourself opened the great window and disordered the room, that suspicion might fall outward upon a kidnapping or a suicide. Captain Vane withdrew by the way he had come. Miss Isabel, herself half distracted with terror, hid the photograph you had taken from the wall, and upon the back of which you had already, in a hand imitating hers, written a small line of self-incrimination. You then, with Miss Isabel's dazed assistance, dragged Lady Whitmore, living still, thank God, into the closet, closed the papered door, and pushed the wardrobe back into place. Miss Isabel returned to her room by the roof. You descended by the corridor, and in passing, you were seen by Mart, and you said good night to her, as though you had not seen her at all. The small, deliberate lie of a man who wished to be remembered as having been elsewhere. That, mesdames and messieurs, is the staircase. Each rung a contradiction. Each contradiction a small step nearer to what was, in fact, done. He paused. Godfrey Whitmore had, in the course of the recitation, drawn himself slowly upright in his chair,
His arranged carelessness was gone. In its place was something older, colder, more nakedly intelligent. The face beneath the face. An entertaining fiction, Monsieur Poirot. You have no proof of a syllable of it. I have, monsieur, the testimony of Miss Isabel. I have the testimony of Marthe. I have the testimony of Dr. Lomax, who has this morning survived, contrary to his wishes, a quantity of laudanum which was intended to spare him the necessity of speaking, and who has now, I believe, decided to speak nevertheless. I have the testimony, when she is well enough to give it, of Lady Whitmore herself. And I have, monsieur, the small photograph upon the console table, upon the back of which, in a hand imitating Miss Isabel's, is a sentence which pretends to be a confession by Miss Priscilla. 2 imitations, monsieur, in a single line of ink.
It is a fastidiousness of forgery which will interest the graphologists exceedingly. Godfrey looked at the photograph. He looked at his brother. He looked at his hands. He did not speak. There is, Poirot went on more softly, one further small confirmation. This morning at first light, I set out upon that console table a certain arrangement of white roses. One of the roses I placed at a 1/4 inch out of true. In the course of the night, and again this morning, that rose has been corrected, and a different rose has been displaced, and again corrected, and again displaced. Only one person in this house passed that table with sufficient frequency and sufficient concern for the appearance of order to adjust it each time. You, monsieur, could not bear to leave it wrong. You have adjusted it 4 times in 12 hours. It is a small vanity, but a small vanity in a house of large secrets is often the string by which one draws the whole tapestry down. Godfrey Whitmore's hand, the one which had struck Cecily Whitmore, the one which had adjusted a rose 4 times in 12 hours, moved, slowly, from the arm of the chair to the pocket of his coat. Colonel Race in the doorway moved his own hand, no less slowly, to his own pocket. Godfrey's hand emerged empty. He had thought better of whatever had begun to move in him. He said, in a voice quite unlike his ordinary voice, quite young, almost puzzled, "It was to have been so small a thing, Marcus, only to keep her quiet, only that. It was Aldous who struck her. I did not strike her." Sir Marcus did not look at his brother. He looked at the fire. "Godfrey," he said, "you struck her when you asked Aldous to enter that room. The rest is arithmetic." Poirot rang the bell. The inspector came. There was, at the last, no scene of any kind. Godfrey Whitmore rose and went with the constables in the small, quiet manner of a man who had already, in a certain interior room of himself, ceased to resist. Miss Isabel was permitted for the present to remain upstairs. The law would in due course weigh her part in the affair, and Poirot, having spoken privately for a 1/4 hour with the inspector, had reason to believe that her part would be weighed with mercy. Captain Aldous Vane was taken that afternoon upon the London road, attempting to reach the coast. He had not, as it happened, been able to bring himself to leave without one further glance at the shrubbery in which he had, for 3 weeks, been almost happy. When they had gone, Poirot stood a long moment in the yellow drawing-room with Colonel Race and Sir Marcus. The white roses had been restored to the console table. Poirot looked at them. Every one of them stood now exactly in its place. "Monsieur Poirot," said Sir Marcus quietly, "I do not know how to thank you." "Do not thank me, Sir Marcus. Thank rather the small habits of order in the human heart. It is by these, a folded shawl, a corrected rose, an oiled hinge, an unnecessary word to a maid upon a landing, that we are, all of us, in the end, revealed. Your brother constructed in one evening a machine of admirable complexity, but he could not resist adjusting a flower.
And a man who cannot leave a flower alone will not leave a story alone. And a story too often adjusted becomes at last its own confession. He turned. Priscilla stood in the doorway. She had heard. Her grey eyes were wet but very steady.
Monsieur Poirot, he was, after all, a coward.
Mademoiselle, he was a man. That is the sadder word of the two, and it contains, alas, the other. She bowed her head. She went without further speech up the stairs, toward, one hoped, the room in which her stepmother lay, and toward, one hoped further, the small, slow beginning of a forgiveness which neither of them had yet learned how to ask for. Poirot took up his hat. He took up his stick. He inclined his small, egg-shaped head once to Sir Marcus. "There is nothing," he said, "quite so orderly as an English drawing-room, and nothing quite so disorderly as the human hearts within it. It is why, mon cher colonel, I have never entirely retired from my profession. There is always, somewhere, a rose that stands a quarter-inch out of true." He went out into the sunlight of the morning. The gravel of the drive was raked. The rooks called from the elms. The gardener, at his roses, whistled a tune from before the war, a tune, as it happened, that Captain Aldous Vane had once whistled also, in a country lane, on an evening not so very long ago. Poirot, hearing it, permitted himself the smallest of small sighs. Then he stepped up into the waiting motor car, and the door was closed, and the house of Marbury Court, its secret at last drawn out of it, its order at last restored, and its sorrow at last permitted decently to begin, receded slowly behind him into the pale English morning. The End.